Greetings and welcome. My name is Aaron Craig with Be Honest Games, and in this video we're going to be covering DS lists and DS grids, both of which are data structures inside of GameMaker Studio. Now, we've actually already covered grids and lists just without the formal names. So a list is actually a one-dimensional array with some added functionality, and a grid is basically a two-dimensional array with quite a bit added functionality. So for the most part, I'm just going to be giving you a quick review, because if you want to know how to use arrays, then follow the array instructional video, because that goes into much more depth, as arrays are extremely important and you definitely want to know what they are and how to use them. So a couple of important things to note though is a list is actually a data structure that you might run into if you ever code data structures, and it does have certain forms of functionality that you'll find across all lists. Now, the nice thing is that you are probably familiar with them if you have ever made a list, right? It is just a sequence of items that the order doesn't matter, can be rearranged, can be sorted, whatever the case may be. It's a 1D array, and you can do all sorts of things with it because the order doesn't matter. You can add things anywhere you want. You can take things out wherever you want. You can sort them by whatever value is in them, and you can also just shuffle them up in here. Now, the functionality inside of GameMaker Studio allows you to do all of that with the functions. So you can sort, you can copy, you can shuffle, you can replace, you insert. There's an actual DS list add, which will add directly to the end of a list, but that isn't like jargon or terminology. That's just the way that they've said it. So in a list, normally it doesn't matter where you add it because the order really isn't important. You also have checking if it's empty. You can clear it, create, and destroy, all things that you would expect. Now, most of the time when I use 1D arrays, I don't use lists, but that's not to say they're not useful. If you are creating a list of items that you want to be able to juggle around, a DS list is much better than having to write the for loops to then sort and shuffle things on your own. You definitely can, and if that's something that interests you, go for it. Take the leap, try it out. But it's already been done for you. So if you're going to be sorting a list of numbers, a list of values of some kind that you're going to want to shuffle or that you want to sort one way or another, use a DS list. Now, the really nice thing is that when you make a DS list, if we make one right here, we can add an event. So we can say list equals DS list create. A really cool thing is that they are a 1D array in the way that you can actually access them as well. So I could say list0 equals name, and that is perfectly fine. So if we actually run that in the debugger, I'll show you that this just turns into an array, and that's really all about it. So if we pause that, we can go to variables or go to instances. Oh, never mind. We have to put it in there. Right, that's important. So run that one more time. You'll see that you can actually access a list the exact same way you access an array, which is really nice and really handy. So if we look at this, it just comes up as an array. So you can't really view it as a DS list. At least I'm not finding an easy way to do it, because it's just an array. So once you start putting things in there, it'll show up just like an array. Now, for safety purposes, if you use the functions that they've given you here, then you will always be doing the same things and you'll always know if things are working out properly, which is why they have them in the first place, right? You can go in and you can make a list, and then you can just use it just like an array if you want, and call DS list shuffle, sort, add, whatever, and it will still function properly. But if you're going to use DS list specifically, I would encourage you to use their functions, get used to them, because it makes sure that it is always going to work and you won't have any errors. If you call DS list add or insert every single time, you don't have to worry about this being like an invalid number somehow down the road, because the function will always work, or you'll know exactly where that goes wrong. And then we have the DS grid, which is very similar to a 2D array with a bunch of extra functionality. Now, this is really cool because there's a lot of things you can do in here, but it does also have a couple of caveats that you should know about. So when you create it inside of the actual function, you do need to give it a width and a height. Now, the width and the height can be resized really easily. They have a function for that. And you can also just add more on by calling a larger index than what it currently has. So it will automatically reallocate size and memory if you call a larger index than what you've set for it. And that's the same thing for a list as well. You see here we've got a list, and if we set something to 50,000, then it will set 50,000 position to equal name, and 0 through 49,999 are all going to be 0. It's a huge waste of space, but it is going to dynamically allocate all of that memory that you need and then put it in the spot it should be. So if we make a grid, or DS grid create, you give it a width and a height, but that width and the height isn't really that important because you could come in here and access it, say 66 equals Aaron, and it's going to work just fine. It will set it up so that it's exactly where it should be. It'll allocate all the memory you need. So if we come down here and look at the debugger, the grid 6, 6 is going to be Aaron. Now, you see here that 0, 1 through 5, there's nothing actually in there. They are all lengths of 0, and the last one is length of 7. So it's only going to allocate the absolute memory you need when you need it, which is good to know. But then, of course, because it is allocating memory, you have to then delete them at the end, right? You never want to keep a data structure around if you don't need it, because they use up memory, and they use up dynamically allocated memory, which is a little more difficult to manage if you're using all of it. Like all the code, all the sprites, everything in your game, when you compile it, GameMaker is going to know exactly how much that takes. So it's going to set aside this much space, this much memory. But while your game is running, if you're creating grids left and right and setting them to 100,000 index, you're going to start using up a lot of memory, and you might start having some memory leaks if you don't destroy them properly. Just keep that in mind. But for the most part, a DS grid is going to give you just a lot of functionality that you would be fairly hard-pressed to code yourself for a 2D array. So it allows you to do regions specifically, so you can get like the minimum, the biggest, the smallest of a region that you set yourself. So you can check an entire area, a row, a column. It doesn't matter. You can also completely redefine a region. You can do all sorts of math on them. You can do all sorts of things that they've set up for you inside of a 2D array, which is really, really helpful. So I use 2D arrays all the time, but I don't use grids that often because a lot of times I don't need this extra functionality that comes along with them. But if I do, a grid is going to be the way I go. I'm not going to go and replicate all of these functions on my own when they've already been done. And that's kind of the big thing when it comes to data structures in general. You've got a lot of options, and you just need to find the right tool for the job. If you just need a list of things, then you might want to just do a 1D array, or you might want to do a list if it is more helpful. If you need to do things in an order, yeah, you could use a list and just add them in the right order, but a queue makes a lot more sense if it's supposed to be in order. So find the tool you need and then use that tool to the best that you can. So if you have any questions about lists or grids, let me know, but for the most part, you already know how to use them. And if you need help on specific functions, definitely go and look at them, read them, play with them, and ask me. I'll do my best to help you out. But that's really all there is to it. So in the next one.